black thing go from left to right. And I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. And I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better... Sheriff, see ya.
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And let's jump into it tonight. I'll be welcoming Claire to the show, and Claire comes to us from the UK. And in 1989, she went on a business trip to California, and she was out sightseeing, and she ran into these creatures and actually was hurt by the encounter, physically hurt. And Claire shares a lot of details, a lot of very interesting details regarding this encounter, regarding what happened, what the creatures were doing, her conversation with law enforcement afterwards. Should be a fantastic show tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it. Claire, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you, Claire. Thank you again. And your encounter took place in California in 1989. This was a business trip. This wasn't, I mean, you weren't on holiday or, as we say, on vacation here in the United States, correct?
No, I was working over there. I'd just joined a software company, a fairly big software company. And prior to that, I'd been at working for an American investment bank. And I was out on a secondment to their offices in Mountain View. So the first weekend I was over, didn't really have anything to do. So I went around San Francisco, did the tourist things. Next weekend, I went up to Napa Valley, where they were just starting to put the vineyards in. And then the weekend before I was flying up to Madison, Wisconsin, I went up and stayed in Carmel Heights by Big Sur Forest.
I got you, just kind of sightseeing. If you would you just kind of start from the beginning? I know that you're not real super comfortable talking about this, but if you would you start from the beginning and walk us into what happened? What did you see?
Okay. Well, I'd actually gone out, and this is probably going to sound mad to people in America. We don't have sea otters in the UK. And I'd gone out to photograph sea otters in Monterey on the Saturday. And I was staying in a hotel that's just south of Carmel. And the people down Monterey Pier had said it was really good photography to be had up further. If you drive south, there's lots of beaches and creeks and coves, bits and pieces. So I went there in the afternoon, probably about 3:30, 4:45, parked the car up. There is a trail that's quite an open trail. It's more like a path that goes down to a beach, and probably about half a mile to a mile from the parking area. And at the first beach you come to is very, very stony. And then you can walk across when the tide's lower. And there's a big beach moving back up north that is very, very sandy. it was great. There's a load of rocks on the far side, so I wandered up there, sat down, I got my camera bag with me, taking photos, and was really just waiting for the sort of sundown. So just about to go back, very happy with what I'd taken. And yeah, we have an expression, someone's walked over your grave. You really feel quite, yeah, your hair stands on end, you feel cold. And I looked over to the way I would need to go back, and there were, I thought, first of all, it was a huge cat, but it was much more big and bulky than a cat. And then there was more than one of them as they came round the promontory where you've got the cove shape. And I have never seen anything like it in my life. Very, very large, very hairy, moving on all fours. And there were several of these creatures, one behind the other. It obviously wasn't a cat because it was moving in a very strange manner. And the head kept popping up as if it was sniffing, and then it popped up. It stood up on 2 feet. There was no other way to describe it. And it was bipedal, must have been 7 to 8 foot tall. It was followed in onto this cove by 2 other 5 to 6 foot, maybe just over 6.5 foot, and 3 much smaller ones. The larger one, which was definitely male, waded into the ocean. The 2 others, the 2 larger ones, which were, I would have said, females, sat down on the sand with the smaller ones. The smaller ones were digging in the sand. The large creature, the really large one, was ripping out seaweed and throwing it back towards the females. And they were chewing the roots where it had been pulled out of the water and rubbing it onto their chests and around their necks, and then draping it around over their shoulders. So I'm just sat there, I'm just watching this. I can't say I was actually thinking anything more than stunned. And probably like the idiot I am, I just thought, well, no one's going to believe this. I'll take some photographs of it. So lifted the camera up to take photographs. Part of the lens kit dropped off, hit the rocks, went bouncing down where I was sat. And the large creature turned round. Every one of them snapped round and was staring toward me, at which point the male that was in the water basically was up to its, I'd say, mid-chest in the water, came striding out of the water. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. And basically it looked, the way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. One of the females, the larger one of the 2 females, came after it, and probably about 30 yards or so away from me, they had an argument, for want of a better word. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. The male that was in front it didn't take its eyes off me, but it sort of rotated from the waist. The head didn't really turn, it rotated from the waist. And it was like if you see a couple in a shop, it was verbalizing with her. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. And it was like a couple having a domestic dispute. Then the body turned right back at me, and it just screamed. It was like no other sound I've ever heard. It was bellowing at me, and effectively it just threw down and slammed its fists into the sand, and then stood up. It basically, the last thing I remember, because I passed out. I'm presuming I passed out. I was feeling incredibly sick. Was this thing mouth wide open, big pink mouth, and it was obviously male. It had an erection and it was urinating, and that is all I remember.
Well, what happened next?
Well, what happened next is I came to. This was just coming probably sunset by now. It was 5:30, 6 o'clock when this happened. So there was still very good light. The next thing that happens is I come to about 20, 30 yards back from where my car is parked. I was dressed in hiking boots, jeans, had a shirt on underneath, and I had a waxed cotton jacket. They're fairly common in the UK, called barbers. And this one was a gamekeeper's jacket, so it zips both ways. So you can zip down from the top or you can zip up from the bottom. And this was actually almost pulled over my head. And you see, I can't understand how I got there. I was black and blue up my left-hand side, and my face was very badly scratched and bruised. I could have got there. I just don't understand how I got there, because I can't remember getting there. I hadn't got my camera. I hadn't got my camera bag. I just don't know. Got to my car. I got the keys that were in my zipper pocket, in my breast zipper pocket. Got back into the car, drove to the hotel. Now, the hotel where you pull into it's right off Highway 1, just before you come into Carmel. And you don't have hotel rooms. They're little cabins built into the side of the valley as it's going up, facing the ocean. And they do valet parking. So you have to walk through the main reception area of the hotel to get to the car. Obviously, I was in one hell of a state. And the young man that was doing the valet parking went and got someone. They obviously thought I'd been assaulted. I wasn't making any much sense. So they put me in a side room and called the police. And the police duly came, took my details. First of all, there was one guy. He just wanted me to run through everything that had happened. And I did. And he sat there and looked at me. The first thing was, he was saying, have I been drinking? Was I on drugs? Obviously, I was very young to hold the business position I did. He was quite incredulous until I got the business cards out. Then again, he was, what was I doing down there by myself? Or, found it quite strange. And he was just being, to my mind, incredibly rude and obnoxious by this point. So then he asked me to go through everything again. And by this time, another chap joined him. Now, the first man was in uniform. The second man wasn't. And if he was a police officer, well, I've never seen a police officer like him. He had jeans on, what we'd referred to a lumberjack shirt. So it was plaid, white T-shirt underneath that. He was in his 40s, early mid-40s, very, very wiry pepper hair, big beard, didn't say anything, just stood at the back of the room and listened to what I had to say, went through the whole thing again. And the man said, well, what you obviously saw was bears. You'll be very, very lucky. You know, you're lucky to be alive. Obviously, you know, you just concussion and you've staggered back up to the car. And, I think I said in my email to you, the largest animal we have in the UK, natural animal, is a red deer. But I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears. And I was quite adamant about that fact with him. And he read me the riot act, and what I saw had been bears, and I wasn't to say anything to anyone else about bears, other than it was bears. And I again turned around and said, absolutely not. And he said, do you not have police in your country? And it was, well, yes, we do. I said, but they don't tell you what to write in statements. And he just looked at me and said, do you understand English? I said, well, I am English, actually. I understand it very, very well. Thank you. And he said, you're not to discuss this with anyone. We've taken your report, and you're not to go back there. And that was that. And that pretty much, that was the end of it, Wes. I stayed in the hotel over Sunday. I still felt incredibly sick. I cancelled my visit to Madison. I was due to fly up there on the Monday, and I flew home instead on the Tuesday.
Wow, what an account, Claire. What an account. I guess welcome to America. I mean, I think you were talking to a police officer, and the other guy was probably a government contractor. I want to come back to that, though, in a minute. When you, during the encounter, do you think you were dragged back to your car?
If I had, the truthful answer is I don't know. Do I think I was? I think I was dumped there, because if I had walked and stumbled, I would have had marks on both knees, my hands. My hands were pretty much not damaged. It was the back of my hands that was scratched, and it was the side of my face. And I do think, I think I was dragged there. I think I was dragged there and dumped.
Yeah, I think that you were too. Your injuries are consistent with being dragged, and especially with your coat being pulled up, you're probably dragged by your coat and dumped there. And I think you're right. I think you would have had, if you had stumbled back to your car, your knees would have been all scratched up. And so I tend to agree with you. I want to ask you, can you describe the creatures that you saw?
As I said, the one was definitely male. They were mammals. They moved from, the younger ones tended to move on all fours. And it's the strangest thing that, as I said, I've ever seen. They got a movement that, if you've ever seen lizards move, where they put their sort of forearms through, and it almost looks like a swimming motion. And then there's no distinct neck. So when the heads came up, it looked really quite bizarre. Black hair. The females had shorter hair than the male, and the males had round its face, the hair was longer. It was, I'm not saying like a lion's ruff, but like a lion has longer hair around its face. It had longer hair and sort of a ruff around its neck. The chest was not as hairy, but it was like a very, very large, very fit bodybuilder, massive muscles on either side of its head. The arms were slightly longer and very, very long fingered. It looked apish, thin lips. It had flat teeth like us, but very large canines, black eyes. The eyes must have been, I was slightly above it on the rocks when I lost consciousness. And the eyes must have been about 4 or 5 inches apart. The actual facial area was hairless, the chest hairless, and the forearms were somewhat shaggy, but that was it. As I said, the females didn't have the same muscle structure. If anything, they seemed chubby, and they had shorter hair than the male. But other than that, the appearance was similar. It seemed more ape-like than human. That's pretty much it, really. The mouth was incredibly pink, but I presume that was because it was angry. And it was angry. That's all I can say. The other thing that I, in hindsight, it's fascinating. They were definitely verbal. They were communicating with each other. They were in conversation with each other, a very angry conversation with each other, but that's all it was. It sounded like a language that you could almost understand, but you couldn't. I think in the email I called it gibberish, and it would... and when one would finish speaking to the other, it would go, and the other one, they would just back and forward, back and forward, back and forward. And that was pretty much that. Like I said, after they finished having their domestic, the male turned around as he was at full height, screamed, and just smashed his fist into the ground, and that and the scream, and I was very much bye-byes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame you for passing out. I probably would have passed out too. It's interesting how you described the language, and I know when you and I talked off the air, I asked you about it, Ron Moorhead and the Sierra sounds, and you had never heard them before. I'm curious, did it sound like this?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. It was that quick monkey chatter there going back and forth. Interesting. What do you think the argument was about? Do you think she was stopping him from coming and harming you?
I think if she hadn't been there, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Wes. For whatever reason, what I have absolutely no doubt, and this is in hindsight because at the time I wasn't thinking of anything. I have no doubt, having stared into its face, that I would have been dead. I would have been dead. It was absolutely sheer, unbridled hatred and anger. Nothing more.
One thing that you mentioned in your account of it having an erection and peeing, I've had other people on the show, the two brothers I mention all the time. One of the guys told me that when it was chasing him, and you hear him in the beginning of the show, he says it ran all the way through his garage and all the way up to the door, and his brothers tell him to grab a gun. Well, the one thing that they'd mentioned was when it was chasing him, he said it had an erection, and it was peeing all over the place. In the garage, it had peed in the garage. Let me ask you, what did you think these things were when you saw them? I mean,
well, when I first saw them, because I was getting up to leave, I was about to leave, and like I said, all of a sudden it felt like someone had walked over my grave. I went absolutely stone cold, and my hairs just stood up. I thought they were, to start with, very, very large cats, or a large cat, and then there was more than one, and then there was a troop of them. But you're transfixed on them. I have never seen anything like it. I hope I never see anything like it again. I didn't know what to think. Bigfoot, Sasquatch was not on my horizon. It's not something that you really hear about, or you certainly didn't back then over here. We heard of abominable snowmen, but they were myths. And, Britain is a fairly boring place as much as wildlife goes. So, one never has to think about going outside in case there's cougars or bears or wolves, because we don't have anything. They were bipedal primate stroke hominids that are not classified. They are definitely not any of the primates that have a classification. Other than that, they're mammals. More than that, I don't know, but they are verbal. So they're obviously intelligent. They were working together as a team. They were communicating together. And I presume the male acted so aggressively, I am assuming because it's females and its children were there.
Yeah, you're probably right, Claire. I wonder if he mistook your camera for a gun, and you guys kind of got from their vantage point, you got the jump on them, being up on the cliff, and they didn't realize that you were there. I wanted to ask you, did the females and the other ones, did they all kind of have the same appearance?
The juvenile ones, and I am making a presumption that they're juvenile, tended to move around on all fours, but the larger, probably more senior ones, they came onto the beach area, the cove area, on all fours, and then they sort of flipped up, and that was weird. They just sort of popped up onto two legs, and they moved fluidly. I have never seen another animal move like that, with the exception of possibly gazelles. And the amount of space this male covered in such a short period of time to get up next to me, if it wanted to kill me, it could have killed me. There's no two ways about it. Nothing I could have done. It would have snapped me like a twig.
Yeah, I remember even in my own encounter, I remember when it dropped down, it's bizarre looking when they drop down. I would imagine they pop up the same way, but it's very bizarre. I know what you mean. It's very bizarre. I wanted to ask you about the females. You mentioned females. Do you think that there were females because of did they have breasts? I know you had mentioned they were a little chubbier.
They were chubby. The male, though, again, another expression, I don't know if it translates, not a bean on it, no fat with muscle. Absolute muscle. The thighs were huge, and it was like the most dedicated bodybuilder you have ever seen in your life, bar none. The females, yes, they had breasts. They were pendulous. Again, they had less hair on their front where the breasts were, but there was still hair. Like the male had less hair on the breast area. And they didn't have the rough or the longer hair around their neck. It was more, let's say, 3 to 4 inches long, where the rough around the male's hair was 6 to 8 inches long in places, and had a very well-defined edge to it. I mean, incredibly impressive looking animal. If it is an animal, well, it's an impressive looking mammal. But they were definitely female. The features were softer than the males. And I didn't get a close enough look at the juveniles to tell you anything more about them. They were on the other side of the cove, and really, when the male started running towards me, I paid them no further attention. I'd just gone.
Yeah, and it's a terrifying encounter, Claire. I mean, I realize this is many years ago, but it definitely still stays with you. And I realize, you're fearing for your life at this point. You're not really writing down details. I wanted to ask you, though, when the male ran towards you and when he had roared at you, how close was he to you?
About 15, 20 feet. And I was up on the rocks. I've been sat up on the rocks, so I was slightly above its head.
Oh, wow. That's really close. So you're looking down on him, and he's looking up at you, and you're 15, 20 feet away. That's too close. Way too close.
I said way too close. And when it screamed, I mean, I could feel my insides vibrating, and that's the last thing I felt until I woke up.
Yeah, and I know you're not really into Bigfoot. I know your brother is, and he's the one that listens to the show and asked to have you contact me. In the Sasquatch world, they talk about infrasound all the time and the effects of infrasound. And I don't know if you've ever looked into that, but do you think it might have been just fear? That's why you passed out?
Could have done. I've never fainted in my life, but perfectly. Yeah, well, I'm kind of glad I did in a way.
Yeah, when they roar at you, Claire, I mean, you feel it. I mean, they scream at you, you feel it. And a lot of witnesses report that. I mean, it rattles your insides when it hits you. I wanted to ask you, one thing I find really fascinating about your account is I get a lot of reports of these things down on the beach. The one thing that really caught my attention when we were talking about it, so the male was pulling seaweed out and throwing it on and eating it and then throwing some on the shore, and the females were rubbing it on their bodies?
It's long seaweed. It's like ribbons, and it's got like the roots on the bottom, and the females were chewing it, rubbing it across their chests, and they were putting it on their shoulders.
Yeah, that one detail really fascinates me. I wonder why. I wonder if they were to walk away with it, putting it on their shoulders to walk away with it.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
strange.
know. Like I said, they were putting it on the shoulder, so I don't know. We take seaweed tablets, don't we, for vitamins, I think.
Yeah, it's a great detail, Claire. I mean, with the seaweed, it really makes me stop and think. And maybe you're right. Maybe they're using it for the same type of thing, because seaweed has vitamin properties to it. And maybe that's why they were going after the seaweed. I'm curious on how this affected your life because, you're from the UK. Here in America, Sasquatch is pretty well known. Bigfoot's pretty well known. And yes, you're going to get ridiculed. You're going to run into people like the cops you ran into, the douchebags that say, well, how much were you drinking? You obviously saw a bear, that sort of thing. But there's also a percentage of times when you talk to people and they've either seen it or they have a family member that's seen it, or a friend that's seen it. How did this affect you? And because I don't know that you guys really have Sasquatch in the UK. I haven't looked into it, so I can't really answer intelligently about it. I'm just not sure if you guys have it there or not.
I would be very surprised. We get flying saucer reports, I think, as most, or UFO reports, as most countries do, but that's about the sum of it. And then you've got old stories about footpads and the like, but they're very much put down as myth and historical stuff. How did it affect me? Well, just to sort of round this up some years later, when I came back, well, I obviously had to tell the company that I wouldn't be flying up to Madison to go and see the other software company they just bought. And I probably made a mistake, I should think, of telling the HR lady why. And I didn't call it Bigfoot because at the time I just didn't know what it was, but I explained what had happened. Went back to the UK. It didn't affect my career there, but obviously it had got around the US office, and I was the crazy woman from the UK who'd seen a Sasquatch, which is really when I started looking at, oh yeah, okay, that's a Sasquatch. Maybe it was because, it just got as far as me looking at a couple of pictures in books at the time, because the internet really wasn't back then. And it could have been, but obviously the pictures are not what you see in real life. So, and who's to say there's only one sort of them? I have travelled the world, been all over the place by myself, never really worried about it. But I have to say, I probably lost an awful lot of confidence after that, not surprisingly. One sort of funny codicil to the whole experience, whereas thinking about it, was many years later, I continued to work in IT, and I was working a lot with government clients over here and military and such like. And you get vetted, as I'm sure you do in the US. You have, you used to call positive vetting and then DV, deep vetting. And they obviously check your background, do what they do, meet with friends, family to ask questions about you. And then you get interviewed and you have the usual questions, Would you take money for selling company secrets? Have you ever stolen from anyone? Have you had an affair? Have you used prostitutes? La la la. So was going through the interview with this chap, and after about 10 minutes, he said, "And have you ever seen a Bigfoot?" And in the UK, you're not going to ask that sort of question. So somewhere along the line, it had gone down on the papers that Claire's seen a Bigfoot. So yeah, there we are.
Well, you're not alone, Claire, and you're definitely not crazy. You know, I have people from all walks of life that come on this show, and I can't even tell you how many police officers I've had on the show, way more than the audience actually knows, because a lot of times I don't say what people do for a living. I mean, I've had doctors and surgeons on, and from all walks of life that come on the show and share their encounters. And, you know, in your encounter, thank God that I guess the female stopped the male from coming for you, because, you know, sometimes people do get hurt in these encounters. Sometimes people get killed in these encounters. And I think I talk a lot about the Sasquatch and their temperament and how quick things can change for you. I mean, things can change on a dime in a moment's notice. And you saw how quickly he went from digging up seaweed to wanting to kill you. I mean, he went from 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye.
There was no 0 to 60. It was just full on. It was picking a switch from it, you know, wading around, pulling seaweed out, to flipped around and steaming towards me. And it was just, as I said, it was seconds. And for a creature of that size, that's up to its armpits in the ocean, to be able to push through the water and get out and start running that quickly, never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Something that big shouldn't be able to move the way they move and how fast that they can move. The other detail you brought up about the young ones, I've heard that before. People, especially people who claim to have these on their property, one thing that they'll generally say is the little ones will be on all fours most of the time. Rarely do they actually pop up and run around on 2 legs. I'm fascinated by the whole incident and the fact that you were able to walk away unharmed. I wonder why they dragged you back to the car. One question I want to ask you is, what do you think that Sasquatch is, Claire? If someone were to ask you what is Sasquatch, what would you say to them?
It's definitely a mammal. It is definitely in a verbal society. I would have thought it's on the same genetic level as primates and ourselves. But it isn't human, and it's not one of the recognized apes. Somewhere in the middle of both, I think, Wes.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Claire. It's, I guess on behalf of America, sorry for the cops that were dicks to you. That really is a shame. But, you know, you tend to hear that a lot with encounters. Generally, it's people who have evidence or if they were hurt, where it's always a cop or some sort of law enforcement person and this other guy. And I really think the other guys that show up are government contractors. And I think their job is to shut you up, you know, to make you be quiet and to let you know you saw a bear and don't go back down there. I mean, this happens more than you would think. And so I truly believe there is a effort to conceal this from the public. This is definitely being covered up. And again, I think when you get hurt or if you have evidence, you're probably going to get a visit from these guys, and because there's proof to what you're saying. You're walking away with something. And you know, the thing about the encounter that really I'm stuck on is I wonder why they would drag you back. I mean, your injuries are consistent with being dragged back towards your car, but that seems kind of bizarre. I wonder why they would drag you back.
Well, as I say, I don't know that I was, but I presume I was, and they just dumped me there. Because the actual track down from the car park down to the coves, you've got hill on one side, and the other side you just got thicket and brush. So you couldn't have really got through there. It was very dense. And yes, I could have been concussed. I could have fallen down. I could have hit my head. I probably fainted. I don't know. But they weren't interested in me getting medical attention. Not that I don't think needed it. I probably should have been seen by a doctor. I hadn't got any noticeable bangs to my head other than my face was badly scratched, but they were just interested. What did you see? You didn't see that. This is what you saw. We're telling you what you saw. You saw bears, and don't tell anyone else you saw anything else. That was all they were interested in doing. You've seen bears.
Yeah, and that's generally what these guys do, Claire. I've heard it time and time again. They always try and cram a bear story down your throat. You know, you hit a bear, you shot a bear, you were attacked by a bear. And generally, these guys will show up one of two reasons. Either A, you have evidence, or B, someone got hurt. And that's the only time I've ever heard of these guys actually showing up. And it's very consistent to what you said. There's always one guy in a uniform who's obvious law enforcement, and then there's a second guy. Now, the second guy seems to be in charge, I think, and he's not dressed in any sort of uniform. He's, you know, like how you described him, jeans, beard, you know, shirt, looked like he walked off the street. And generally, those guys are the ones who are actually in charge. I think those guys are government contractors. And I say that because I think eventually when this comes out, there's deniable, the government can deny they knew anything about it. Well, we don't have anyone that, all our law enforcement guys are, you know, they're in uniform. They don't show up in jeans and t-shirts, and they're not going to threaten you on it. What are you talking about? And I think eventually those guys will be the fall guys. That's, I mean, probably sounds crazy to the audience, but I've had some time to think about this. And I think when they show up, again, it's because you have evidence or someone got hurt, and they have to shut you up and make sure that you don't go around saying you ran it, you know, especially being a professional businesswoman, you have injuries. Bear doesn't make any sense, but that's what they're there to shut you up. And that's probably why they didn't call an ambulance or take you to the hospital. Whether you needed treatment or not, you think they would have offered it to you. And that's probably the last thing they wanted you to do, because then there's documentation. Obviously, they can get around that and get rid of documentation. I know I sound like Alex Jones, but I've heard so many things about these guys off the air. And I wish, it's so ridiculous they go with that argument that, you know, it's a bear, it's a bear, it's a bear. It generally just pisses witnesses off when these guys show up and do that. You would think they would use a different tactic when dealing with people. You know, here in the United States, a lot of times when people see these things and they get close to them, they will describe a smell. They will describe it as like rotten flesh or a sewer, 1,000 times worse than a skunk, just a real nasty smell. Not always. It doesn't get reported as much as people think, but it does get reported. And I'm curious, when you were on the rocks looking down at this thing, you're 15 feet away from it, did you smell anything during your encounter?
No. I have listened to a couple of your shows after my brother suggested I contact you, and I know that people have said there's an absolutely awful smell. I can't say that I smelt anything at all.
Yeah, like I said, in a lot of encounters, sometimes it gets reported, sometimes it doesn't. I've had people who have been 10, 15 feet away like you were and didn't smell anything. I've had people who were 20 feet away and, you know, could barely hold their eyes open and were gagging from the smell. I haven't been able to figure out the smell yet. It's so random, but it doesn't get it reported quite as much as people might think. And I'm so glad that, you know, you were able to walk away from this encounter, Claire. Like I said, it's a terrifying account. It really is. And I don't blame you for passing out. I probably would have passed out. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share it. I know you're all the way across the pond. And this happened many years ago, and I know you weren't super comfortable talking about it, but I thank you so much for coming on and sharing it.
It's been a pleasure, Wes. It's after 30 odd years, because this was 1989. Apart from my brother, you're the only person I've spoken to about it since.
Well, thank you for that, Claire. You know, it was an honor talking to you, and again, I really enjoyed hearing your encounter. There was a lot of great details I could grab out of your encounter, and thank you so much again for sharing it.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows.